My narcissistic sister tried to steal my fiancé before my wedding. She got caught and disowned. Hello, read it. There are two kinds of people in this world, those who build and those who destroy. I have spent my entire life trying to be the first kind. My sister, Veronica, has always been the second. I sometimes wonder if she was born that way or if she became it. If something inside her was always broken, always twisted, or if it was shaped over time by the way the world treated her. People worshipped her. They fell at her feet, mesmerized by her beauty, her confidence, the effortless way she commanded attention. They fed into her sense of superiority, encouraged her to believe she was untouchable. Maybe that kind of constant validation warps a person. Or maybe she was simply always this way, like a fire that does not care what it consumes as long as it burns. From the moment we were children, I lived in the shadow of her destruction. And to this day, I have never met anyone as terrifying as my sister. Most people think of evil as something obvious, a looming figure in the dark, a shadow with cruel intentions, something that announces itself with menace and sharp edges. But real evil is quiet. It hides in the places you least expect. It wears the face of someone familiar, someone beautiful, someone who knows exactly how to manipulate the world to bend to their will. Veronica knew how to make people love her. She knew how to make them want to be close to her. She was magnetic in a way that defied logic, the kind of person who could walk into a room and command attention without saying a word. People wanted to be her. They wanted to be near her. And that was exactly what made her so dangerous. She was the golden child, the favorite, the one my parents adored without question. They never saw her faults, never noticed the cracks in the perfect image she projected. It didn't matter what she did or how many people she hurt. Veronica could do no wrong in their eyes. She was their little miracle, and I was the other one, the quiet one, the one who didn't demand attention, who didn't cause trouble. That was my role, the one who held everything together while Veronica tore it apart. I am Olivia, 27 years old, and I have spent my entire life cleaning up my sister's messes. The first time I realized what she was, I was 6 years old. Veronica was 9. Even at that age, she was beautiful, charming, and cruel in ways I couldn't yet understand. We were playing outside when I found a baby bird that had fallen from its nest. It was so small, barely breathing, its fragile body shivering against my palm. I thought she would help me save it. I thought she would care. Instead, she took it from me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. A slow, deliberate moment followed, a heartbeat where I thought she might change her mind, where I thought maybe I was wrong about her. Then, without hesitation, she crushed it in her fist. I remember standing there, frozen, feeling something inside me crack. I couldn't understand it then, but I know now that it was the first time I realized some people do not feel empathy. Some people only know how to break. That was my first lesson, but it would not be my last. I tried to tell my parents. I tried to explain what had happened. The way her expression never changed. The way she looked at me afterward like she was waiting to see what I would do. But they didn't believe me. They never believed me. They told me I was making things up. That Veronica would never do something like that. That I must have misunderstood. That was how it always was. Veronica did whatever she wanted, and I was expected to look the other way. As we grew older, her cruelty became more calculated. In school, she made sure I never had anything that was truly mine. If I made a friend, she took them away. If I found something I loved, she made fun of it until I was too ashamed to love it anymore. She knew exactly where to strike, where to place her words so that they cut the deepest. When I won an art competition in elementary school, she faked an injury so convincingly that my parents rushed to her side, completely forgetting about my award. When I got my first job in high school, she spread rumors about me to my coworkers, making them wary and distant. When I graduated college, she made sure to cause a scene at my celebration dinner, turning the night into a disaster so that no one remembered to be proud of me. Every time I built something, she tore it down. For a long time, I told myself it didn't matter, that I could rise above it, that if I just kept my head down, if I didn't compete with her, she would leave me alone. But people like Veronica do not work that way. It was never about competition. It was never about rivalry. It was about control. And control, for her, meant ensuring that I never had anything of my own. I spent years trying to escape her orbit, trying to carve out a life that was untouched by her chaos. I worked hard. I moved out as soon as I could. I built a life that was quiet, stable, safe. I surrounded myself with people who weren't enthralled by her, who didn't look at her and see a goddess, but instead saw a person like any other. Then I met Daniel, and for the first time in my life, I had something she couldn't touch. Daniel was different. He wasn't like the others, the ones who fell into her gravitational pull without question. He saw through her charm, through the effortless way she manipulated people. He didn't buy into the image she projected, didn't care about the way she demanded attention wherever she went. He loved me. He saw me in a way no one ever had. For the first time, I felt safe. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe that I could be happy. I should have known it wouldn't last. Because Veronica doesn't just take things. She makes sure that when she is done, there is nothing left. And this time, I wasn't sure if I would survive the destruction she was about to bring. I used to believe that if I built a life separate from Veronica, I could escape her reach. I thought that if I stayed away, if I didn't engage, if I made myself as small and uninteresting as possible, she would lose interest in me. I thought that as long as I did not challenge her, as long as I did not compete, she would leave me alone. But I understand now that Veronica does not need a reason to destroy. It is simply what she does. She does not need to be close to you to ruin you. She does not need an invitation into your life to dismantle it piece by piece. She only needs to see that you are happy. She only needs to know that you have something she does not. That is enough. For a long time, I allowed myself to believe that I had escaped. I had spent years carefully carving out a life untouched by her. I had a career that I loved, friends who saw me for who I truly was, and, most of all, I had Daniel. Loving Daniel was like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime in darkness. He was calm, steady, everything I had never had before. Being with him made me feel safe in a way I had never known was possible. I had spent my entire life waiting for the inevitable disaster, bracing for the moment something would be ripped away from me. But with Daniel, the world did not feel so dangerous. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future. A real future. One where I was not constantly looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next storm. But the storm always comes. The first sign that Veronica had noticed was subtle, almost imperceptible. A shift in the way she spoke to me at family gatherings, the way she lingered a little too long in conversations about my life. She had never been interested in my happiness before, had never once asked about the men I had dated, about my relationships. But now, there was something new lurking beneath her voice, something careful, something calculated. Then came the messages. At first, they were disguised as sisterly concern. Questions about Daniel, about how serious we were, about whether we had talked about marriage. She made it seem like she was just looking out for me, like she was curious, like she cared. But Veronica has never cared about anything that did not serve her. I knew better than to believe she had suddenly developed an interest in my well-being. Then came the invitations. Dinners, drinks, events she insisted I attend. And always, always, she wanted Daniel there. I should have known what she was doing. I should have seen it for what it was. But I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was trying to change. That maybe she had finally grown up. That maybe she had finally learned to exist without tearing others apart. I was a fool for believing that. Because Veronica does not change. She does not grow. She only adapts. She only finds new ways to get what she wants. And this time, what she wanted was not just to hurt me. She wanted to break me. She wanted to prove that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much I built, she could still reach into my life and take everything from me. At first, it was small things. A lingering touch on Daniel's arm when she spoke to him. A slow, knowing smile when he laughed. Compliments that felt like something more. Something with edges hidden beneath the honeyed words. I watched as she played her game, as she tested the waters, as she tried to gauge whether she still had the power she had always wielded so effortlessly over others. Daniel, oblivious, did not seem to notice. He was polite, kind, never once faltering in his loyalty to me. But I saw it. I had spent my entire life watching Veronica weave her web. I had seen her draw people in, twist them around her fingers, make them believe they were special before discarding them like they were nothing. I had seen her do it over and over again, and now I was watching her try to do it to the one person I could not bear to lose. I wanted to believe that she would stop, that she would lose interest when she realized Daniel was not charmed by her in the way so many others had been. But Veronica does not lose. Veronica does not let things go. The moment she senses resistance, she digs her claws in deeper. And so she escalated. Suddenly, she had an interest in the things Daniel liked. A newfound love for the same books, the same music, the same hobbies. She brought up their shared interests in conversation, positioning herself as someone who understood him in ways I never could. She made sure to be near us whenever she could, inserting herself into our plans, finding excuses to show up at the places we went. For years, she had barely acknowledged my existence. Now suddenly, she wanted to be close. She was patient, methodical. She was not reckless, not impulsive. She moved slowly, carefully, laying the foundation for something I could not yet see. But I knew what was coming. I had seen this pattern before, and I knew that this was only the beginning. There was a night, weeks before my wedding, when I found myself alone with her. A family gathering, one of those obligatory events where I had no choice but to endure her presence. She was watching me, something unreadable in her eyes. And I knew, in that moment, that she had made a decision. She was going to take him. She was going to try. Because it was not about Daniel. It had never been about him. It was about me. It was about proving that no matter how far I had come, no matter how much I had built, I was still nothing in comparison to her. She wanted to ruin me. She wanted to watch me break. And she was going to do it the same way she always had, by taking something she had no right to take, by making sure that when she was done, there was nothing left. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that she would not stop until she got what she wanted. There are moments in life when everything you thought you knew unravels in an instant. When the world tilts, when the ground beneath you is no longer solid, when you realize the person you have spent your life fearing is no longer the one in control. Veronica had spent years believing she was untouchable, that no matter what she did, she would always win. She had manipulated, deceived, and broken people without consequence. She had torn apart friendships, relationships, reputations. She had taken whatever she wanted and discarded it when it no longer entertained her. She had always assumed there would be no reckoning, no moment when the power she wielded would be turned against her. She did not realize that moment had arrived. For weeks leading up to my wedding, I watched her move, calculating and methodical, playing her game with the precision of a master manipulator. I had spent my entire life being a spectator to her destruction. But this time, I was no longer the passive victim. This time, I was not the naive little sister who waited for her happiness to be stolen. This time, I was watching her not as prey, but as someone who had learned from her. Someone who had studied her just as closely as she had studied me. Veronica had always been predictable, even in her cruelty. She followed patterns, repeated tactics that had worked before, confident that they would always work again. She escalated in slow, careful increments, pushing boundaries just enough to test their strength. She didn't pursue Daniel directly at first. She positioned herself carefully, circling, drawing him in without making it obvious. She planted ideas, crafted scenarios that made her seem vulnerable, fragile, someone in need of saving. She preyed on his kindness, knowing that he would never turn away someone who seemed to need help. But what she did not know was that I had been waiting for this. I had spent my life waiting. The moment arrived sooner than I expected. A week before the wedding, Veronica reached out to Daniel with a message so perfectly crafted it was almost laughable. She told him she was struggling, that she felt alone, that she needed someone to talk to, and that he was the only person who truly understood her. She asked him to meet her. Alone. It was a move so bold, so reckless, that for a moment I almost couldn't believe she thought it would work. But she did. She had spent so many years getting away with everything that she never even considered the possibility that this time she wouldn't. She assumed that, like so many before him, Daniel would be drawn in, that he would see her the way she wanted to be seen. She believed with absolute certainty that he would walk into her trap, that once he did, once the idea had been planted in his mind, it would only be a matter of time before doubt crept in. She did not realize that she was the one walking into a trap. I told Daniel to go. I told him to meet her. I told him to let her speak. And I made sure that when he did, she would not be the only one listening. Véronica chose à hôtel bas. She was careful like that, always selecting places that allowed her to control the narrative. It was public enough that she could later claim nothing inappropriate had happened, but private enough that she could create an atmosphere of intimacy. She arrived early, looking effortless in the way only she could. Everything about her was calculated. Her soft, perfectly styled waves, the dress that struck the exact balance between elegant and alluring, the subtle makeup that made her eyes seem larger, more vulnerable. She knew exactly how to present herself, how to manipulate perception. She had spent her entire life perfecting the illusion. She did not realize that this time, the illusion was hers to fall into. Daniel arrived on time. He sat across from her, his expression neutral, his body language open. He let her talk. He let her lean in, let her touch his arm, let her create the moment she thought she was crafting. She spoke about the past, about regrets, about the what-ifs of life. She spoke about feelings she claimed she had tried to ignore, about the connection she was certain existed between them. She told him that if he had doubts, if he wasn't sure about marrying me, he should explore them now because if he waited, it would be too late. She had played this game so many times before. She had broken relationships, friendships, even marriages, all with the same quiet, insidious methods. And she believed with everything in her that this moment would be no different, that Daniel would falter, that a crack would appear, that she had done enough to make him wonder, even for a second, whether he was making the right choice. She was wrong. Daniel did not react. He did not respond. He simply reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and pressed a button. And then, in the dim glow of the hotel bar, her own voice filled the space between them. Every word she had just spoken played back, crystal clear, undeniable. For a single frozen moment she did not move. Then, she reached for her phone, her fingers fumbling, her expression shifting from confidence to confusion to something dangerously close to panic. Dozens of messages flooded in. Missed calls, notifications, names she recognized, our parents, our relatives, mutual friends, people she had spent years carefully cultivating relationships with. Because I had sent the recording to them all. The look in her eyes when she realized what had happened. The sheer disbelief, the horror, the dawning understanding that she had finally lost was something I would remember for the rest of my life. She tried to deny it. She tried to claim it was a joke, a misunderstanding, that Daniel had taken her words out of context. But there was no way out. The evidence was undeniable. The people she had spent years manipulating, the ones who had always believed her, who had always taken her side, were seeing her for what she truly was. Veronica had spent her entire life believing she was untouchable. And in a single moment, I had taken that away from her. The downfall of a narcissist is never loud. It is never the dramatic explosion they so often inflict on others. It is slow, suffocating, realization creeping in like poison. It is the moment they understand that the power they have spent their entire lives wielding is gone, that the control they believe they had is nothing more than an illusion. I watched as the realization settled into her bones, as her world collapsed around her, and for the first time in my life, I felt something I had never thought I would. I felt free. Veronica had always been the one pulling the strings, the one setting the stage, the one crafting the story. She had never considered what would happen when the puppet decided to cut the strings. She had never imagined a world where she was the one being played. And now, there was nothing she could do but watch as everything she had built turned to ash. The world Veronica had built for herself had never been real. It had always been an illusion, a carefully constructed mirage where she was untouchable, adored, invincible. She had spent years weaving lies so intricately that even she had begun to believe them. She had convinced herself that she was always in control, that she was always the one holding the power, that no one could ever turn against her. But illusions only last as long as people are willing to believe in them. And that night, in that dimly lit hotel bar, with her own words exposing her for what she truly was, Veronica realized that the world she had so carefully crafted was crumbling beneath her feet. The aftermath was instant and brutal. She left the bar in a hurry, walking quickly, shoulders tight, her face pale in a way I had never seen before. Veronica had always been composed, always graceful, always sure of herself. But now, she looked like an animal that had just realized it had walked straight into a trap. She didn't even spare Daniel a final glance before rushing outside, her phone clenched in her fist as the flood of messages and missed calls continued to pile up. I could picture it all in my mind, her frantically typing explanations, trying to twist the truth, searching for an escape route. But there wasn't one. The recording was damning, undeniable, and she knew it. And worse than the recording itself was the fact that she hadn't been the one in control of the situation. For the first time, she had been outplayed. I didn't need to follow her. I didn't need to see what happened next. I had spent my entire life watching Veronica work, watching her spin lies, manipulate, twist reality into something that always served her. I knew exactly what she would do. She would go to our parents first. That was always her instinct, her safety net. They had always been her protectors, the ones who shielded her from consequences, who refused to believe she was capable of cruelty. She had spent her life wrapping them around her finger, ensuring that no matter what she did, they would always come to her defense. But things were different now, because the evidence wasn't just a story someone told. It wasn't an accusation that could be dismissed or ignored. It was real, tangible, irrefutable, and it had spread. By the time Veronica arrived at my parents' house, they had already heard everything. The recording had been sent to them, to extended family, to friends, to people she had spent years convincing of her perfection. The betrayal of it, the sheer exposure, was something she had never experienced before. She had always operated in the shadows, always ensured that even when she hurt people, she could deny it, twist it, turn it around on them. But now, she was cornered, and there was no way out. I don't know exactly what was said in that house when she walked through the door, but I know my mother called me not long after, her voice shaking with something I had never heard before. Rage. Not at me. At Veronica. It was the first time in my life I had ever heard my mother sound angry at her. Truly, genuinely angry. She asked me why I had done this, why I had sent the recording, why I had exposed my sister so brutally. She was still trying to understand, still trying to fit the pieces together, still grasping at the belief that there had to be some other explanation. And for the first time in my life, I did not try to soften the truth. I told her everything, not just about what happened with Daniel, but about all of it. Every cruel moment, every manipulation, every time Veronica had hurt me and my parents had turned a blind eye. I laid it all bare, every wound, every scar she had left, and I could feel the weight of it settling between us. There was no defense my mother could give, no justification she could offer, because the truth was undeniable now. And she knew it. I could hear it in the silence on the other end of the phone. Veronica had spent her entire life being the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one they always believed, always defended. But in that moment, in that terrible, stretching silence, I knew she had lost them. Not just their trust, not just their admiration. She had lost their belief in her. And without that, without the power she had always held over them, she was nothing. The fallout was swift. My parents did not speak to her for days. Family members cut contact. People who had once adored her suddenly saw her for what she truly was. The invitation stopped. The admiration faded. The world that had always revolved around her was suddenly, devastatingly still. Veronica did what she always did when she felt cornered. She lashed out. I received messages filled with venom, accusations thrown at me with wild desperation. She told me I had destroyed her life, that I had turned our family against her, that I had humiliated her in a way she could never recover from. She still did not understand. She still did not realize that she had done this to herself. I did not respond. There was nothing left to say. The last thing I heard was that she tried to repair the damage, tried to rebuild the relationship she had burned, but no one was willing to play along anymore. The cracks in the illusion had become too wide, too deep, and no matter how hard she tried, she could not patch them. She had spent her entire life climbing higher and higher, convinced she would never fall. And now, she was finally realizing what it meant to hit the ground. But I did not stay to watch, because for the first time in my life, I did not have to. Veronica no longer had a place in my world. And for the first time, I was free. The silence in my life after Veronica's downfall was unnatural, almost unnerving. I had spent so many years living under the weight of her presence, the constant tension of knowing that at any moment she could take something from me, ruin something, twist something until it no longer belonged to me. It was strange to wake up in the mornings and realize I didn't have to brace myself for what she would do next. There was no calculated cruelty waiting just out of sight, no looming disaster crafted by her hands. For the first few days after the recording was sent out, I kept waiting for the inevitable retaliation. The storm, the backlash. Veronica had never been the type to accept defeat, never the type to slink away and lick her wounds in silence. She had always fought back, always found a way to twist the narrative, to manipulate the people around her into seeing her as the victim. But this time there was nothing. She had lost, and for the first time in her life, she knew it. She did not reach out to me. She did not call, did not text, did not try to confront me. The messages she had sent in those first few hours after everything fell apart, angry, frantic, filled with venom and desperation, had stopped completely. It was as if she had been wiped from my life overnight, erased by the weight of her own mistakes. But I knew she wasn't gone. She was unraveling. The damage was swift and brutal. The recording had done more than just expose her attempt to sabotage my relationship. It had shattered the image she had spent her entire life cultivating. The people who had once adored her, who had once fallen under her spell so easily, were suddenly looking at her with different eyes. The carefully constructed illusion was gone, and without it, she was nothing. At first, she tried to do what she always did: deny, deflect, manipulate. She reached out to people individually, tried to control the story, tried to convince them that it had all been a misunderstanding. But it was different this time. The evidence was undeniable. The truth was not something she could reshape to suit her needs. People weren't listening anymore. I started hearing the whispers, the small pieces of information that drifted back to me through mutual connections. Friends cutting her off, invitations disappearing. People she had once treated as devoted followers suddenly distancing themselves, unsure of how to interact with someone whose mask had been torn away. And then came the final blow. Our parents disowned her. There was no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match, no final plea for understanding. It happened quietly, coldly, with a sort of finality that even I hadn't expected. My mother, who had spent years defending Veronica, had finally seen the truth laid bare. She had listened to the recording, she had heard the venom in her voice, the way she had so casually tried to dismantle my life, and something inside her had broken. For the first time, Veronica's lies had not worked. For the first time, my mother had not taken her side. I had not expected them to cut her off completely. I had thought there would still be some part of them that held on, that clung to the daughter they had once idolized. But Veronica had built her entire life on the illusion of perfection, on the belief that she was untouchable. And when that illusion was shattered, they no longer knew who she was. They didn't just stop supporting her financially. They stopped speaking to her altogether. I don't know what their final conversation was like. I don't know if my mother cried, if my father said anything at all, if Veronica tried one last time to convince them that she was the victim in all of this. I don't know if she begged. But I do know that when it was over, she had nothing. No family, no friends, no allies left to protect her. And she had never been alone before. She tried to rebuild, of course. People like Veronica do not simply accept defeat. She left the city, moved somewhere new, tried to start over where no one knew her name, where no one had heard the stories. She found new people to manipulate, new lies to tell, new ways to weave herself into the fabric of a life she did not deserve. But the thing about a narcissist's downfall is that once the cracks begin to show, they never fully disappear. Her name had already been tainted. The rumors had already spread. The world she had once controlled had turned against her, and no matter how far she ran, it followed her. She could never fully outrun what she had done. I thought I would feel satisfaction. I thought I would feel victorious. But as I stood in the quiet of my own home, in the life that I had fought so hard to keep, I realized that what I felt was not triumph. It was peace. For the first time in my life, I was free. There was no longer a shadow looming over me, no longer the fear that something would be stolen from me the moment I found happiness. There was only my life, untouched by her, untainted by the destruction she had always left in her wake. Daniel and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony, surrounded by people who truly loved us. There was no mention of Veronica, no space left for her in a life she had tried to destroy. I do not think about her often, but sometimes late at night, I wonder if she ever stands in front of a mirror and sees herself for what she truly is. If she ever lies awake in the dark and wonders how it all went so wrong. I do not think she does. She is not capable of change, not capable of reflection. She will always believe she was the victim in this story, will always find a way to shift the blame onto someone else. She will never understand that she did this to herself. But that is no longer my burden to bear. She is gone, and she will never be a part of my life again.